Hey guys, tonight we're diving into what might have been the most chaotic, emotionally draining side hustle of the Middle Ages. Matchmaking. That's right, forget dragons or plagues. The real danger was trying to set up your neighbour's daughter with a guy who thought bathing twice a year made him a catch. So get ready to play the medieval version of Tinder, except instead of swiping, you're bartering goats and praying nobody gets stabbed over a bad date. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this gentle parade of historical nonsense. Leave a comment and tell me if you trust your love life to someone who uses leeches as a form of therapy. Maybe you are that person. I support you. Now dim those lights, put on a fan for that medieval white noise, get comfortable, and maybe grab a thick wool blanket, just in case you need something to hide behind when things get too cringy. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how romance worked when you couldn't even spell romance? Who decided who married whom? Was it all about love, or was it more about dowries, land, and how many teeth you had left? Did matchmakers really have the power to make or break entire families, or did they just spread gossip while pretending to be professional? Did you have to bribe people with turnips? Was tall, dark and handsome code for owns two pigs and only smells slightly like onions? And why did absolutely nobody mention the lice? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1372. The church bell is clanging, there's a suspicious draft coming through your hut, and someone is already asking when you're going to find a nice spouse for cousin Egbert. You, my friend, are now a medieval matchmaker. Try not to ruin anyone's life before breakfast. You roll out of your straw mattress, brush the fleas off your tunic, and remember, you've got 3 mothers banging at your door before sunrise, each with a daughter who absolutely deserves a nobleman. Time to begin another day of gentle, chaos and extremely awkward introductions. Let's take a moment to really set the scene. The air in your tiny wooden cottage is cold enough to remind you that insulation is a distant dream, and your mattress, if you can call it that, creaks ominously as you shift your weight. You're surrounded by the earthy perfume of hay, unwashed linen, and the faint aroma of last night's onions, which have somehow permeated everything you own. The sun is barely a rumour, but the noise outside your door is already at full volume. 3 mothers, each more determined than the last, practically shouting through the cracks. Their voices blend into a relentless chorus of "Me Maud has the best teeth," and "Don't forget, Edith churns the finest butter." The subtle art of matchmaking, it turns out, starts with refereeing a competitive shouting match, before you've even had breakfast. You rub your eyes, stretch out the kinks from another night of sharing your bedroom with a stray chicken, and brace yourself for the onslaught of expectation. You're the matchmaker, and in this village, that makes you half oracle, half scapegoat. If the local baker's daughter marries well, it's thanks to your wisdom. If someone's cousin ends up with a goat thief, it's also your fault. Obviously. No pressure. Stepping over the lumpy threshold, you're greeted by 3 pairs of hopeful, judgmental eyes. Each mother is armed with an offering, a warm roll, a slightly wilted posy of herbs, or, if they're feeling particularly strategic, a small purse of coins that's just for your trouble. You accept them all with the practiced grace of someone who has perfected the art of nodding and not making promises. You know the real currency in your trade isn't money or bread, it's secrets. By the time you take your first bite of breakfast, you already know who's feuding with whom, whose cow is producing suspiciously little milk, and which family desperately wants to marry up, down, or sideways. Of course, matchmaking is more than just collecting bribes and compliments. You need to be a walking, talking database of local gossip, family trees, and embarrassing medical histories. Who has a mysterious rash? Who might be related too closely for comfort? Who still owes the priest 3 chickens from last Lent? Every detail matters. One slip, and you could accidentally unite 2 people who share a great-grandparent or, even worse, 2 people who share a taste for petty theft. In the medieval matchmaking world, incest and larceny are equally bad for business. You jot down a few quick notes on scraps of parchment, your own private code. Maud, Good teeth, talks too much. Edith. Butter skills, possible club foot, check with village healer. Hilda. Youngest, strong arms, has never seen a frog she didn't like. Each entry is a delicate balance of optimism and brutal honesty, because you know the success of a match depends less on feelings and more on assets, alliances, and the overall goat-to-person ratio. After the mothers finally leave, muttering hopeful prayers and not-so-subtle threats, you finally have a moment to breathe. You peer out your tiny window, a sheep's bladder stretched over a wooden frame, and watch as the village slowly wakes up. Somewhere in the distance you hear the clang of the blacksmith and the distant mournful sound of someone failing spectacularly at playing a lute. The world may be simple, but your job is anything but. You're the invisible hand guiding who marries whom, a living spreadsheet of local ambition, desperation, and hope. And just when you think you might get a moment of peace, there's a new knock at the door. This time it's old widow Agnes, insisting her grandson is just shy, not cursed, and demanding you find him a wife before the next market day. You sigh, tuck your bribes into a safe corner, and prepare to perform miracles, because in medieval matchmaking, every day is a fresh chance to disappoint everyone equally. By the time the church bells toll for morning prayers, you've already been gifted, bribed, threatened, and emotionally blackmailed, all before most people have finished their first mug of small beer. Welcome to your day as a medieval matchmaker, part gossip, part guidance counsellor, and, at least until lunchtime, the most popular person in town. Forget roses and long walks on the beach. Your professional toolkit is a basket of half-true rumours, a rosary for appearances, and maybe a book of poetry so tragic it could be used to break up couples instead of making them. Let's unpack what it really takes to survive as a medieval matchmaker, because you are not armed with a dating app or even a quill that writes in straight lines. Your main asset is information, gathered through years of polite eavesdropping, accidental discoveries, and an ear that can detect the word dowry whispered 3 fields away. Rumours, it turns out, are both your bread and butter and your most dangerous weapon. You collect them like medieval baseball cards. Did you hear about Oswin's extra toe? Has anyone mentioned that Cecily's last fiancé left the village with all her spoons? Every detail is ammunition, ready to be deployed the moment a mother starts inflating her daughter's virtues like a pig's bladder balloon. But it's not just about the gossip. Presentation is everything. That's where your rosary comes in. Whether you're pious or just pretending, a well-timed clutching of beads convinces villagers you're on the side of virtue and fate. 2 things that rarely agree on anything. When negotiations get heated, or someone accuses you of meddling too much, a solemn, let's let the Lord decide buys you precious time to invent a reason why Alfwyn and Maud are definitely not second cousins. The rosary is your medieval get-out-of-jail-free card, or at the very least, a good way to avoid answering questions about your own disastrous love life. And then there's the poetry. In a world where literacy is as rare as a warm bath, you are one of the few who can recite, or at least convincingly fake, lines of tragic medieval verse. Your poetry collection is more of a threat than a gift. If you two don't get along, I'll have to recite the ballad of Sir Roderick's unfortunate rash. In rare cases, you actually try to use it for romance, reading out a borrowed stanza as couples gaze awkwardly at their muddy boots. Usually the poetry does more to scare people into compliance than inspire love. It's the medieval equivalent of forcing your date to listen to your self-published folk album in one sitting. Physical relics are another trick up your sleeve. Sometimes you're gifted with a lucky spoon, a feather from a chicken who survived 3 winters, or a patch of St. Ethelburga's very holy moss, each one believed to nudge fortune in the right direction. You hand these out judiciously, like a wizard dispensing magical objects, but really, you're just trying to keep everyone busy, so you can get through the day without another round of matchmaking mumfights. If all else fails, you pull out your secret weapon, an old battered copy of a dream interpretation guide, that claims seeing a goat at sunrise means true love is imminent. This book has gotten more mileage than your only pair of shoes. Let's not forget about the most important tool, your face, specifically your I'm listening face. This carefully practiced look of deep concern and sage wisdom is your best defense against both outright lies and inconvenient truths. When someone's mother swears her daughter has never so much as spoken to a man, you raise your eyebrows just enough to imply you know better, but not enough to trigger a duel. When an anxious father insists his son is definitely not the type to run off with the miller's apprentice, you purse your lips, nod slowly, and let the silence do the heavy lifting. Of course, none of these tools would work without a talent for improvisation. No 2 days are alike. One afternoon you're pretending a love charm made from sheep's wool actually does anything. The next, you're inventing a reason why someone's unusual birthmark is a sign of good fortune, and not, as the priest claims, proof of a demonic pact. By midday you've run out of both patience and patience charms, but somehow you keep the romantic machinery turning, mostly with a mix of bravado, superstition, and sheer luck. So, as you tuck your basket of rumours under your arm and head out to broker another possibly disastrous engagement, remember, in the medieval world, your greatest tools are wit, nerve, and a willingness to weaponise really bad poetry. Because nothing says happily ever after like a couple forced together by rumours, relics, and a stanza about love lost at harvest time. You aren't just introducing two strangers, you're playing with family fortunes, village alliances, and the possibility of a livestock-based lawsuit. No pressure. Let's set the scene. You're standing in the muddy crossroads of a village that's seen more drama than a soap opera marathon, flanked by anxious parents and two potential lovebirds who look like they'd rather be mucking out pigsties than meeting each other. In the modern world, introductions are easy. Hi, this is Jeff. He likes hiking and artisanal cheese. But in the medieval world, an introduction is a tightrope walk over a pit filled with pitchforks, gossip, and expectations. Every word matters. A poorly timed comment about someone's sheep can end a budding romance, or worse, start a blood feud over grazing rights. You take a deep breath and summon your matchmaker's smile, a look that's equal parts serenity, authority, and the faintest whiff of panic. Your goal is to make everyone feel important, but not so important that they get ideas about raising their dowry. You begin with the basics, speaking slowly and clearly, as if reciting the Lord's Prayer for a room of particularly sceptical goats. This is Thomas, eldest son of Osric the Cooper, whose barrels have never leaked in living memory. You pause for effect, hoping nobody remembers the infamous cider incident. And this is Agnes, whose family's cabbages have been the pride of 3 parishes. Small talk in this context is less about breaking the ice, and more about making sure the ice doesn't shatter and sink everyone's reputations. You compliment the livestock, but not too enthusiastically. Nobody wants to seem desperate for a good milker. You steer clear of touchy subjects like failed harvests, debts, or the time Agnes's brother accidentally set fire to the barn. Instead, you stick to safe topics. The weather, always bad, local saints, always tired, and how lovely the turnips look this year. A lie, but a necessary one. It's not just about what you say, but how you say it. You modulate your voice for maximum reassurance using words like fortunate, promising, and reliable. Every nod is calculated, every gesture choreographed to keep tempers cool and hopes high. You offer just enough optimism to keep everyone invested, but not so much that they start planning the wedding before anyone's actually agreed to it. Meanwhile, you're running a mental checklist that would put a tax accountant to shame. Are either of them left-handed? Did one of them once insult the other's uncle during Lent? Is there a risk of distant cousinhood? Or worse, a previous failed engagement that everyone pretends never happened? All it takes is a single misstep. A wrong name, a forgotten goat, a hint that someone can't churn butter as fast as the neighbour, and suddenly you're refereeing an argument about the true value of 3 hens and a duck. And then there's body language. Agnes looks at her shoes. Thomas studies a cloud as if waiting for divine intervention. You're the only one smiling, your face muscles already cramping. You gently encourage them to share something about themselves, an impossible task when most people's hobbies include not dying of plague and hoping the church doesn't notice my secret wine stash. So you improvise. Agnes, didn't you help win the village baking contest last Michaelmas? Agnes turns bright red, mumbling something about burnt pies. Thomas grins for the first time all morning. You silently award yourself 10 points for effort. Of course, there's always a wild card, usually a nosy relative hovering nearby, ready to interject with helpful commentary. Perhaps Thomas's mother loudly reminds everyone of Agnes's dowry, or Agnes's uncle suddenly appears, offering unsolicited opinions about the Cooper trade. You smile, thank them, and gently steer the conversation back before it devolves into a spirited debate about barrel staves, or whether cabbages really do grow better on the east side of the village. By the end of the introduction, you're exhausted, but everyone's still speaking, which counts as a win. Maybe sparks didn't fly, but nobody hurled a turnip, and that's really the medieval matchmaking standard. You've done your job, kept the peace, massaged the egos, and, just maybe, planted the seeds for a romance that might survive its first winter. All with a few words, a lot of luck, and the ever-present threat of a livestock-based lawsuit. Your client list is eclectic. Some want love, others want land, and a surprising number just want someone whose last marriage didn't end in mysterious circumstances involving soup. You might imagine medieval matchmaking as a simple process. Find two people who can stand to be in the same room together, wave a chicken feather, and declare them betrothed. In reality, the eligibility process is more like assembling a wagon from leftover plough parts and wishful thinking. First, there are the parents, all desperate to ensure their beloved offspring marry up, or at least sideways, into a family with fewer visible rashes. They bombard you with lists of requirements. Must have strong arms, good teeth, and a cow that's not possessed. You nod solemnly, as if you can guarantee that anyone in this village has more than 6 original teeth, or a single livestock animal that hasn't been mildly cursed by a neighbour. Let's talk teeth. Dental hygiene in the medieval world is less of a routine and more of an ongoing tragedy. When you meet a potential bride or groom, you conduct the customary smile test. A wide grin reveals the true status of their molars, more gaps than substance, or, if you're lucky, a respectable display of slightly yellowed but mostly present chompers. In medieval matchmaking, the bar is set low. If someone has teeth, any number, and can chew bread without bleeding, they're a catch. Missing teeth are explained away as the price of wisdom or a tragic run-in with a bread crust. If the family is rich enough, sometimes they'll borrow teeth from an obliging cousin for the inspection. You learn not to ask questions. Then there's the matter of coins. Dowries, bride prices, and family fortunes are calculated with the seriousness of a royal tax audit. No one's really sure who owes what, and everyone is sure the other side is holding out. You, the matchmaker, must carefully negotiate who brings what to the table. Sometimes it's a fat purse of silver, sometimes it's a goat with questionable morals, and occasionally it's just a large turnip that's rumoured to have healing powers. Every negotiation involves the ceremonial production of coins and small valuables. Here's my daughter, and here's a slightly bent candlestick. On rare occasions, someone tries to pass off a sack of dried beans as future wealth. You smile, nod, and pretend to write it down in your ledger, which is actually just a collection of old bread receipts. Of course, all the teeth and coins in the world can't guarantee happiness, not when you have to consider the web of ancient grudges and family feuds. Every village has at least 2 families who haven't spoken in generations, all because someone's great-great-grandfather allegedly stole a pig. Even more common are the secret feuds. The baker who resents the miller for years of overly enthusiastic flour pricing, or the sisters who haven't forgiven each other since the great goat escape of 61. It's your job to remember every slight, every argument, and every disputed turnip field, because if you accidentally pair the wrong families, You won't just ruin a marriage, you'll restart a feud that's lain dormant for a century. This means that sometimes the most eligible bachelor in the village is absolutely off limits, not because of a lack of teeth or coin, but because his aunt once tripped someone's mother at church. Occasionally you meet someone who wants to marry for love. You try not to laugh. Love is nice, but it doesn't keep you warm in winter, and it certainly won't fix a leaking roof. Still, you make a note of it in your mental files. Maybe, just maybe, there's a candidate who dreams of more than survival and turnips. But mostly, people want practical things. A partner who can plough a straight line, brew decent ale, and ideally won't start a brawl at the midsummer feast. By the end of every eligibility review, your head is spinning with lists, grudges, and suspiciously vague family histories. You count teeth, you weigh coins, and you dance carefully around every simmering feud, all while trying not to match up anyone who's been recently investigated by the priest. In the end, you realise that eligible is a sliding scale, and if someone can survive both soup and scandal, they just might have a shot at medieval happily ever after. It's not just the young lovers you need to impress. Every uncle, aunt, and ancient grandmother in the village wants a say, and nobody is above bribery, especially not you. Medieval matchmaking, you soon learn, is less about two people finding the one, and more about surviving a gauntlet of family opinions, ancient grudges, and not-so-subtle threats. If you ever wondered where helicopter parenting started, look no further than the feudal village, where every relative hovers, meddles, and occasionally swoops in with unsolicited advice or a sharp wooden spoon. The first thing you notice is the sheer number of people who believe their input is not only necessary, but absolutely crucial to the outcome of every match. It's never just the parents. There's the aunt who claims to read omens in tea leaves, never mind that nobody drinks tea here. The uncle who insists he once spoke with a nobleman and knows how things should be done. And the grandmother who remembers every marriage, birth and feud since before the village had a church roof. She's usually the one who clucks her tongue, sighs dramatically, and recounts the tragic tale of cousin Oswin, who married for love and was never heard from again. No one is quite sure if Oswin ran off or simply moved to the next village, but the story has been repeated enough that it has become an official warning. When you, the matchmaker, walk into a room, or more likely a crowded kitchen, you immediately become the centre of attention. Everyone is eager to push their own narrative. My daughter's hands are so soft she's never even milked a goat. Our family line goes all the way back to someone who almost met a bishop. I've heard the neighbours have a secret mole problem. Each statement is delivered with grave importance, and you nod along, careful to look both deeply interested and completely non-committal. Accepting bribes is part of the unspoken job description. Sometimes it's a fat wedge of cheese, sometimes a fresh loaf of bread, sometimes a suspiciously heavy pouch that you tuck away without comment. If you're really lucky, it's an offer of a new pair of woolen socks, which, in a medieval winter, is as close to true love as anyone gets. You pretend you'll let the gifts have no influence on your decision, but everyone knows otherwise. The only thing more powerful than romantic longing is a well-timed slab of smoked ham. But all this attention comes with a downside. The family expects results. If the marriage is successful, you'll be lauded, briefly, and perhaps gifted an extra turnip at harvest. But if there's any hint of trouble, squabbles, a bad harvest, a mysterious rash, you'll be blamed faster than a goose at a bread festival. Families have long memories, and a failed match becomes dinner conversation for at least a decade. In these moments you discover the true meaning of medieval accountability. An elderly aunt standing in your yard, shaking her walking stick, and reminding you that this never would have happened if you'd just listened about the mole problem. To make things even more complicated, families also act as the original private investigators. Before you can even arrange an introduction, they've conducted their own investigations. We asked around, and his cousin's wife says he snores, loudly. Her mother's side is prone to fainting spells. They keep chickens indoors. It's not natural. You must weigh all these findings and present your verdict with the poise of a royal judge, preferably one who can dodge flying loaves of bread. You quickly realise your job is part diplomat, part therapist, and part livestock appraiser. You broker peace between feuding sisters, assure fathers that their future sons-in-law can, in fact, count to 20 and gently steer conversations away from unfortunate incidents involving goats, ale, or last year's harvest dance. Through it all, you try to remember the names of everyone's second cousin and which family is currently at war with the beekeeper. By the end of the process, if you manage to arrange a match without starting a brawl or getting pelted with onions, you've succeeded. At least until next season, when a new crop of overzealous relatives and marriageable children takes their place at the matchmaking table and you begin the whole performance all over again. In medieval matchmaking, family is everything, and they never let you forget it. Where do you make the magic happen? Sometimes it's in a crowded market full of goats. Sometimes it's in church, whispering behind a pillar. Sometimes it's the annual St. Blither's Day Ale and Onion Festival, which smells exactly as romantic as it sounds. The first rule of medieval matchmaking is that there are no rules, only venues, each more chaotic than the last. If you are hoping for candlelit dinners or moonlit strolls, forget it. The medieval world offers 3 settings: busy, holy, and deeply questionable. Your job as matchmaker is to find just enough privacy and public chaos to spark a connection without causing a scandal or attracting the attention of someone's suspicious aunt. The village market is your bread and butter. You navigate through stalls packed with everything from limp cabbages to wild-eyed geese, dodging mud puddles and the occasional suspicious piglet. Here, introductions are brief and shouted over the din. "That's Robert! He's got all his fingers! Margaret, meet Robert! Margaret, careful! That chicken is not friendly!" You smile, you nod, you try not to let anyone see you wince when the aroma of the fishmonger drifts by. Market matchmaking is a delicate art. You want just enough time for a couple to speak, but not enough time for their parents to list every reason the match won't work in earshot of the entire village. If you can wrangle 2 young people into a corner between the bread stall and the man selling questionable cider, you count that as a victory. Of course, sometimes a goat gets loose and the entire event devolves into livestock wrangling, but honestly, that's just another day in the life. Then there's the church, a place of piety, solemnity, and if you're lucky, strategic whispering. While the priest drones on about sin and salvation, you're quietly assessing family connections, passing notes, and perhaps nudging 2 eligible souls to kneel side by side. The church is both neutral ground and a social hub. Everyone is on their best behaviour, which means nobody's allowed to argue, at least not loudly. You've perfected the art of the church introduction, which consists of meaningful glances, subtle gestures, and whispered promises to talk after Vespers. If you're feeling especially brave, you might arrange a brief encounter at the holy water font. It's not exactly the stuff of romance novels, but in a world where privacy is a luxury, a shared prayer is as good as a love letter. But nothing truly tests your matchmaking skills like the infamous saint. Blither's Day, Ale and Onion Festival. On this day, everyone's dignity and sense of smell are left at home. The entire village gathers for an event that can only be described as equal parts celebration, competition and nasal assault. There are onion-eating contests, public toasts, and enough spilled ale to power the local mill for a week. This, for reasons that defy all logic, is considered an ideal setting for young people to meet. Perhaps the logic is that nobody can hide their true selves when half blinded by onion fumes and slightly tipsy from weak ale. You facilitate introductions while pretending not to notice when Margaret's eyes start watering uncontrollably, or when Robert attempts a courtly bow and nearly loses his balance in a puddle of spilled mead. You've learned that every venue has its unique hazards. In the market there's gossip and the constant threat of a stampeding cow. In church there's the ever-watchful eye of the priest, and the risk of someone accidentally promising to marry during a particularly confusing sermon. At the festival, you're up against chaos, onions, and the faint chance that someone will propose after winning the coveted golden shallot. An honour that carries more weight than it should. No matter where you arrange your matches, it's a constant juggling act, balancing privacy and public scrutiny, trying to create moments of connection in a world where the idea of alone time is as mythical as dragons. Yet somehow, amidst all the noise, livestock, incense and onions, you witness the occasional spark, a shy smile, a shared laugh, a promise to meet again after the next market day. That's the real magic of medieval matchmaking, finding romance in places where you'd least expect it, and maybe, just maybe, getting through an entire festival without being trampled by a goat. Love is nice, but have you seen how much a decent cow costs? Dowries are currency, and you, the matchmaker, are the accountant everyone blames when things go wrong. Let's be honest. When it comes to medieval marriage, romance is a delightful afterthought, like parsley on top of a stew made mostly of roots and regret. The real main course is the dowry, a complicated, high-stakes negotiation that makes modern prenups look like playground promises. You, the humble matchmaker, are thrust right into the heart of it, forced to calculate, haggle, and occasionally pray for divine intervention as two families circle each other like wary merchants at a sheep auction. A dowry isn't just a pile of coins. It's an entire inventory of a family's hopes, dreams, and occasionally their sparest goat. One side offers livestock, another side counters with bolts of wool. A third party might try to slip in a sack of dubious apples as a bonus. You quickly learn that everyone has a different idea of what's fair. My daughter is worth at least 3 cows and a silver cup, a mother will declare, as if her daughter's ability to churn butter and recite the Lord's Prayer backwards is a priceless commodity. The other side, of course, sees things differently. 3 cows? Maybe 1 cow, and only if she can also plough a field. Your job as matchmaker is to keep the peace and the numbers reasonable. You host tense discussions in smoky kitchens, scribbling notes in your ledger, which is mostly a list of IOUs and subtle warnings about which goats are prone to wandering. Haggling is expected, theatrics are encouraged, and the threat of a rival suitor with a slightly fancier goat hovers over every conversation. Every negotiation is a delicate dance. Praise the bride's bread-making skills, downplay the groom's tendency to fall asleep in church, and always round up when discussing the family's poultry count. Of course, there's always a wild card, a secret dowry perhaps, or a hidden debt that comes out halfway through negotiations, prompting outrage and the threat to call the priest, or worse, call the priest's mother. Sometimes, a father will dramatically reveal a battered necklace, claiming it's been in the family since the time of the Crusades, only for the other family to whisper that it actually belonged to the baker's wife last Lent. You must weigh each offer with the precision of a tax collector and the diplomacy of a saint, all while trying not to get caught in the crossfire of old grudges and suspiciously specific accusations. But it's not just goods. Dowries often come with strings attached. A cow might need to stay with the bride's family until the next full moon. The silver cup is for display only, never for drinking, and heaven forbid anyone break the sacred wedding ladle, which is apparently both an heirloom and a powerful curse deterrent. You keep track of all these stipulations, sometimes wondering if you should have become a blacksmith instead. At least then the only haggling would be with hot iron and your own singed eyebrows. Then there are the dowry disputes that erupt after the wedding. Was that sheep supposed to be included, or was it just visiting? Did the bolts of wool get infested with moths, or is that just a clever ruse to renegotiate? Families who were all smiles during the feast now glare across the churchyard, whispering darkly about being cheated out of the best chicken. And who gets blamed for any confusion? You, of course. The matchmaker promised us 2 goats. You never said the pig had a limp. You learn to perfect your innocent shrug and develop a sudden, pressing need to be elsewhere whenever the word refund is mentioned. At the end of the day, you realise that a successful dowry negotiation isn't just about wealth, it's about reputation, alliances, and saving face. If you can broker a deal where both sides feel they've gotten the better end, or at least not the absolute worst, you've done your job. As for love, well, maybe that comes later, after the sheep stop arguing and the last apple has been bartered away. In the meantime, you keep your ledger handy and your escape routes mapped. Because in the world of medieval matchmaking, you're only as good as your last cow. Every match begins and ends with gossip. You're both the town's most trusted advisor and its busiest rumour mill. If it's whispered behind a barn, you've already heard it. Twice. In the medieval matchmaking business, information is your greatest currency, and secrets are your retirement plan. You're not just dealing with hearts and dowries, you're juggling a bottomless barrel of rumours, confessions and stories so convoluted, you sometimes suspect the entire village is conspiring to test your memory. Your day starts with a knock on the door and a "just between us," and by the time you've finished your breakfast, you already know who's got a crush on whom, whose goat mysteriously disappeared, and which family is in the middle of a silent feud over an unfortunate incident involving honey, a broken stool and the vicar's hat. You've cultivated a reputation as the village's unofficial confessor. Everyone, from wide-eyed children to toothless elders, comes to you with tidbits of news, hoping to curry favour or just unload a particularly juicy piece of scandal. And while you act like these confidences are heavy burdens, the truth is you thrive on the details. The more complicated the web, the more indispensable you become. After all, nothing sells a match like the suggestion that everyone says they'd make a nice pair, even if everyone is just the 3 people you nudged into agreement during the last market day. But gossip isn't just for entertainment or light manipulation. In the world of medieval matchmaking, it's a strategic tool, as essential as your parchment ledger, or the rosary you twiddle when negotiations get tense. You use it to probe for the truth behind a spotless reputation. Was Edith really as virtuous as her mother claims, or was she spotted last week talking to the new blacksmith's apprentice by the riverbank? Is Robert's limp from a heroic accident, or just a result of falling off the ale cart one too many times? Your job is to sift through the noise, separate fact from fiction, and deploy only the most useful pieces of information at precisely the right moment. Of course, managing this torrent of secrets is a daily balancing act. Share too much, and you're a meddler. Share too little, and you're accused of playing favourites. You develop a sixth sense for when to drop a hint, when to sit on a story, and when to let a rumour quietly fade away. Sometimes, a well-timed whisper can nudge a hesitant parent toward agreement, or, conversely, scare off an overeager suitor who's heard. The bride's family keeps cursed chickens. Every so often you're called upon to squash a rumour before it spirals out of control. This is where your real skill shines. Maybe you overhear that young William is cursed, simply because he sneezed during Mass. You artfully redirect the story. "Oh, didn't you hear? It was just a bad batch of onions. Happens to the best of us." Just like that, disaster's averted, and William's eligibility is restored. Other times, you might subtly encourage a rumour if it suits your purposes. If 2 families are on the verge of a truce, perhaps a tale about a rival suitor from the next village conveniently slips out, prompting everyone to move a little faster before someone else snaps up the eligible party. Gossip also serves as an early warning system. You know who's thinking of eloping, who's been meeting in secret behind the mill, and who's plotting to sabotage a rival's dowry negotiations with tales of questionable livestock hygiene. This is medieval information warfare, and you're the general quietly marshalling facts and whispers to keep the matchmaking process humming. At the end of the day, your reputation as the trusted keeper of secrets is both a blessing and a curse. People treat you with wary respect, always eager for your counsel, but never quite trusting that you won't someday use their secrets to broker a better match, or win an extra wedge of cheese in the next round of bribes. Still, you wouldn't have it any other way. In a world where fate and fortune often hinge on a single, well-placed word, being the master of gossip is the closest thing to power you'll ever have, and the surest way to make sure your name is on everyone's lips, whispered behind every barn. Medieval romance is less about serenades and more about practical negotiations in muddy fields. If a young couple locks eyes across a crowded pigsty, you're there with a contract and a witness. Forget everything you've ever read in fairy tales or seen in big-screen costume dramas. In the real medieval world, Cupid doesn't carry a bow. He wields a ledger, and his arrows are more likely to be sticks poking someone in the ribs to remind them not to say anything embarrassing in front of the priest. Romance is not a stroll in the moonlight. It's an accidental meeting in a muddy lane, a shy glance exchanged over a communal cabbage patch, or perhaps the slow, sizzling burn of two people awkwardly sitting next to each other at the midwinter feast, careful not to let their elbows touch for fear of starting a rumour. If you're a matchmaker, you know the difference between courtly love, the stuff sung about by wandering minstrels, and the romance your clients are likely to experience, which is 1 part hope, 2 parts survival instinct, and 3 parts mud. Sure, there are nobles writing dreadful poetry and sneaking notes to each other in Latin, but for the vast majority, a declaration of love sounds a lot like, "Did you hear? Edith's turnips are the biggest in the parish." Compliments are practical. She spins the finest wool. He's got a strong back and only limps on cold days. The most passionate gestures involve sharing a hunk of bread or letting someone cut ahead at the communal well. The legendary wooing of medieval life is mostly you, the matchmaker, nudging things along with the subtlety of a sheepdog herding particularly stubborn sheep. If you're lucky, you might catch a hint of chemistry. A shy smile, a nervous shuffle, maybe a polite offer to help scrape mud off boots after a rainstorm. This is the kind of romance that can survive a late frost and a suspicious parent lurking behind every hedgerow. Don't get the wrong idea. There are real feelings at stake, but the social choreography is elaborate and heavily supervised. Meetings rarely happen without a chaperone, and any moment of privacy is typically measured in the time it takes for a goat to break free from its tether and cause a distraction. Every meaningful glance is followed by a barrage of questions from every relative within earshot. Did he smile? Did she answer back? Did anyone see you standing too close to the flour sacks? Gossip is faster than true love, and it travels twice as far. Sometimes, though, you witness a rare moment of sweetness. A young couple slipping away to the orchard to exchange tokens, usually a sprig of rosemary, not a diamond ring, or the kind of bashful compliment that makes both sets of parents start planning a wedding before the second syllable has left anyone's lips. You record these details in your secret ledger, savouring them like rare spices. Occasionally you get the chance to play matchmaker and poet, slipping a line of borrowed verse into a letter or orchestrating an accidental encounter on the way to Sunday Mass. But even in its plainest form, romance is hard work. The threat of famine, the weight of family expectations, and the ever-present mud mean that every blossoming relationship faces obstacles you'd never find in a storybook. A couple's first argument is as likely to be about missing firewood as about true feelings. Wedding proposals are often wrapped up with land agreements and promises about next year's piglets. In this world, passion is practical, and love stories end with, "and their goats got along most of the time." Still, amidst the dirt, noise, and relentless supervision, something resembling romance survives. A bashful laugh, a quick squeeze of the hand, a loaf of bread shared on a cold morning. These are the moments that matter. And if you, as the matchmaker, can help two souls find a little warmth and companionship in a world more concerned with weather and wheat than poetry, you count that as a win. Courtly love is rare, but dirty knee romance is everywhere. Just keep your boots handy, your contract at the ready, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed compliment about root vegetables. Before a match is official, you must face the real gatekeeper, the local priest. He has opinions and a ledger, and he's suspiciously interested in whether anyone is related by the forbidden fourth cousin rule. Let's not sugarcoat it. In medieval matchmaking, nothing, and I mean nothing, gets done without the church sticking its well-inked nose in the middle. You could find the most perfect, well-matched couple in Christendom, But before there's any talk of love or livestock, you're off to the rectory for a round of ecclesiastical cross-examination. This is where the priest, who doubles as the village's most dedicated genealogist and professional wet blanket, takes over. He insists on asking questions nobody remembers the answers to, scribbling furiously in a ledger older than most of the parishioners. If you thought a family tree was confusing, wait until the priest starts reciting the consanguinity chart, and you're left wondering whether anyone in the entire region is even allowed to marry. It always starts the same way. You, the hopeful matchmaker, present the couple's names, maybe even try to lead with the bride's reputation for excellent spinning or the groom's impressive collection of teeth. The priest, unimpressed, demands a complete rundown of the couple's ancestry, every uncle, second cousin, and scandalous in-law included. You say she's the daughter of John, son of Osbert, son of Thomas the One-Eyed, he mutters, leafing through his endless notes. But isn't her mother's cousin's wife also descended from the miller's sister? His brow furrows, the pen scratches, and you wait, silently praying he doesn't declare the union forbidden by law, tradition, or a particularly judgmental bishop from 3 centuries ago. Even when you dodge the dreaded related by the 4th degree ban, there are still more hurdles. Bans must be read aloud in church for 3 Sundays in a row, just to make sure nobody in the congregation objects. There's always one person, usually the oldest widow in the parish, who finds a reason to grumble. "Didn't I hear he once stole a carrot from the market?" she'll whisper, loud enough for the front row to hear. "I saw her talking to the tanner last Easter. Scandalous!" The priest listens, nods gravely, and makes another note in his ledger, just in case he needs to deny the match at the 11th hour. And then there's the bureaucracy. Forms to fill out, small coins for the collection plate, vows to rehearse, and promises to fast on certain days. You, the matchmaker, have to shepherd your couple through this holy obstacle course, reminding them not to mention any prior unofficial engagements, and certainly not that time the bride-to-be accidentally attended a festival in a neighbouring parish without permission. The priest takes his time. After all, this is the most excitement he's had all year. He might even quiz you on doctrine, just to make sure you haven't been reading those newfangled romantic poems from France. Still, it isn't all doom and paperwork. The church, for all its red tape and suspicious stares, is also the only authority that can make the union official and protect it from endless family disputes. Once the marriage is blessed, everyone knows the deal is sealed. The priest throws holy water, blesses the couple, and delivers a homily on the virtues of obedience, chastity, and not stealing eggs from your neighbour's henhouse. The parents beam, the villagers murmur approval, and for a fleeting moment you bask in the glow of a successful match, even if the priest is already eyeing you for next week's confession. Just remember, one wrong move, a forgotten cousin, an uncle who owed the church money, a ban skipped due to plague or harvest, can unravel the whole affair. The bureaucracy is relentless. You've learned to carry extra coins, memorise family trees, and offer up prayers for a smooth approval. Because at the end of the day, no matter how strong the love or generous the dowry, it's the priest with his ledger, his rules, and his love of drama who holds the keys to medieval matrimony. And heaven help you if you try to rush him. Your job is half matchmaking, half amateur detective. Are they a widower, or just someone whose cooking should be outlawed? Only you can find out. Every village has its mysteries, and as the resident matchmaker, you develop a sixth sense for trouble, disguised as eligible bachelors and bachelorettes. There's always one, someone who's had more tragic accidents than anyone can explain, whose last 3 marriages ended with bad soup or unfortunate roof collapses. You become an investigator by necessity, sharpening your skills between nervous smiles and polite nods. The first step, asking questions that sound innocent but are loaded with meaning. So, you're single again? How did dear Agnes pass? If the answer involves a suspiciously specific story about runaway oxen and medicinal stew, you know you've got a potential red flag. Serial spouses are the most challenging. On the surface they seem desirable. After all, they have experience, a slightly tragic backstory, and sometimes even a bit of property. But look closer and things start to unravel. Didn't his last wife fall into the well after tripping over a broom? Isn't it strange how all 3 of her husbands disappeared during planting season? Suddenly you find yourself tracking local gossip, visiting old neighbours, and checking the churchyard for any gravestones with ominously similar inscriptions. You become intimately familiar with the difference between an unlucky peasant and someone who's one missing spouse, away from a starring role in a medieval cautionary tale. Then there are the suspicious turnip farmers, those who on paper should be a catch. Good land, healthy crops, plenty of livestock, but something doesn't smell right, and it's not just the turnips. Maybe their field is too well tended for one person. Maybe the livestock is suspiciously quiet whenever you walk by. Maybe the farmer always has an excuse for why you can't visit the root cellar. One time, you even found a would-be groom who claimed to be a farmer, but nobody in town could remember ever seeing him with dirt on his hands. That's when you start poking around under the guise of casual conversation. So, how's the soil this year? Still dealing with those beetles? If he changes the subject to poetry, or suddenly remembers an urgent errand involving goats, you know something is amiss. And it's not just the obvious weirdos you need to watch out for. Sometimes the red flags are subtle. A widow who is suspiciously well off after every loss. A charming bachelor who never seems to have any friends his own age. A bride-to-be with a talent for making people disappear from the wedding guest list. You keep mental notes, consult your ever-growing collection of rumours, and do your best to confirm or deny every odd story before you even think about making a match. You've learned the hard way that a little mystery is rarely as romantic as people think. You develop creative ways to probe for answers. Hosting a dinner is one of your best tools. There's nothing like watching how someone handles a communal meal to reveal their true character. Does the serial spouse avoid all the soup and only eat dry bread? Does the turnip farmer bring suspiciously shiny vegetables that never seem to have dirt on them? You watch, you note, and sometimes you ask the village healer for advice. How many times can someone catch the sleeping sickness before it gets suspicious? And of course, you're also protecting your own reputation. If you match 2 people and something unfortunate happens, it's your name everyone remembers. Didn't the matchmaker introduce Agnes to that man with the odd turnip obsession? Suddenly you're the subject of rumours and not in a good way, so you proceed with caution, balancing hope with scepticism and never taking anything at face value. In the end, your job isn't just to unite 2 people, it's to ensure nobody ends up poisoned, swindled, or mysteriously single by the next harvest. You become part detective, part therapist, and part judge, always on the lookout for signs that true love might be hiding a secret, or a suspiciously large collection of turnips. Because in the medieval world, one wrong match can ruin more than just a wedding feast. It can start a feud, haunt your dreams, or make you question every innocent-looking farmer from here to the next parish. So you keep your eyes open, your ears perked, and your wits about you. After all, you're the only thing standing between happily ever after and the next chapter in the village's book of cautionary tales. Nobles want marriages arranged with the delicacy of a hostage negotiation. And you, unfortunately, are stuck in the middle, nodding politely and praying no one draws a sword. You'd think that finding a spouse for a duke's third cousin, or a baron's only daughter, would be a glamorous upgrade from the regular village fare. Spoiler, it isn't. Arranging marriages for the noble class is less happily ever after, and more, how many different ways can this go spectacularly wrong? Every conversation is conducted under a cloud of suspicion, and every promise is weighed like a declaration of war. You arrive at the manor, ushered in by servants who look at you as though you're about to drop lice everywhere, and find yourself greeted by the most intimidating person in the county, a minor noble with a major attitude problem. The negotiations start with polite smiles and quickly descend into barely veiled threats. You're handed lists of requirements so extensive you wonder if you're assembling a bride or a warhorse. She must be pious, clever, fluent in Latin, fond of embroidery, and above all bring at least a small herd of sheep as her dowry. You nod, you scribble notes, and you try not to let anyone see you sweat. Meanwhile, the other side, usually another noble family with their own list, has a completely different set of non-negotiables. He must not snore, must be immune to gout, and must own at least 3 fields not currently under dispute with the bishop. There's always paperwork, and by paperwork I mean endless scrolls, contracts, and family trees drawn with more artistic license than historical accuracy. You spend hours cross-referencing every family member back to William the Conqueror, just to make sure there's no forbidden cousin lurking in the background. There are banns to be announced, alliances to be negotiated, and at least one priest who insists on adding 3 extra signatures just for the drama of it all. Worse still is the drama. Noble families are experts in the art of the dramatic entrance, the dramatic sigh, and, when negotiations stall, the dramatic threat to disinherit someone. Every step is scrutinised by an audience of servants, tutors, and at least one bored page boy hiding behind a tapestry. Gossip travels faster in a castle than it ever does in a village. You mention a potential match over breakfast, and by dinner the cook, the falconer, and the lady's maid are all whispering about it over the soup. You also have to deal with the delicate business of titles and lands. Marriage here isn't just about 2 people, it's about merging fortunes, securing borders, and maybe even ending a feud that's been simmering since someone's great-grandfather insulted someone else's armour at a tournament. You must ensure the right balance. Enough land to satisfy everyone, but not so much that anyone gets ideas about revolt, and heaven help you if you forget to double-check which fields are currently in dispute or prone to accidental sheep theft. And then, of course, there's the threat of violence. A regular matchmaking day may end with a squabble over a dowry goat. A noble matchmaking day may end with someone challenging someone else to a duel because you implied their family's wine was less than excellent. You learn to keep your compliments vague, your agreements flexible, and your escape routes memorised. All the while, the young couple, if you can even call them that, sit in stiff-backed chairs, trying to look interested while their parents haggle over dowries and titles. Every so often, you catch a glimmer of genuine interest, a soft smile, or the hint of a blush. You tuck that moment away as proof that love can survive even the deadliest of paperwork. By the end, if you've managed to arrange a match without triggering a minor war, you consider it a triumph. You leave the manor with ink-stained fingers, a headache the size of Normandy, and the lingering feeling you've just survived a siege. And while the villagers may grumble and bribe, at least they don't make you sign everything in triplicate and swear fealty over a platter of slightly undercooked pheasant. So you give yourself a pat on the back, double-check your escape plan, and prepare for the next round of the noble drama. Because in the world of medieval matchmaking, extra drama always comes with extra paperwork. Peasant matchmaking is a blend of hope, desperation, and creative storytelling about how many sheep someone really owns. Your average medieval peasant is not looking for a fairy tale. They're looking for someone who can survive the winter, pull their own weight, and maybe, just maybe, bring a little extra bread to the table. This means your job as a matchmaker is less arranger of destiny and more mediator in a series of ongoing negotiations over root vegetables. Every morning you set out across muddy fields, ready to make the most of what the village has to offer. Limited prospects, soggy shoes, and plenty of mould. The typical peasant introduction is refreshingly blunt. You gather 2 eligible souls, let's call them Ethel and Wulfric, in a corner of the cowyard or next to a pile of cabbages. They nod at each other, take a quick inventory of each other's boots, and exchange news about the weather, which is always bad. There's no pretense. Ethel wants to know if Wulfric's roof leaks, and Wulfric would really like to confirm whether Ethel's family's turnips are as free of worms as her mother claims. This is courtship at its most practical. Can you chop wood? Do you have all your toes? What's your stance on communal geese? Naturally, the conversation soon turns to sheep. Peasants measure wealth in livestock, and in every negotiation, the size and health of the flock is, well, heavily exaggerated. You've become an expert at decoding sheep-related boasts. We have 5 sheep, not counting the one who thinks he's a goat. Our ram once chased away a fox, probably. You learn to smile politely and ask follow-up questions about wool quality and winter survival rates, all while keeping a straight face as both sides inflate their assets and downplay last season's mysterious cases of baldness. Hope is essential, but so is desperation. Many peasant pairings are arranged because everyone involved is keenly aware of how hard life is. If someone has made it to the age of marriage without too many injuries, missing digits, or unresolved plagues, they're considered a catch. You do your best to find matches that make sense. Someone with a strong back and a spare blanket. Someone with sturdy boots and no history of goat theft. There are rarely second chances. If the first match doesn't work out, options dwindle quickly, especially after a bad harvest or an outbreak of suspicious rashes. But there's creativity too, especially when it comes to selling a prospective partner. Parents will spin stories so extravagant, you half expect to see a troubadour appear and write them down. My son can thatch a roof in a single afternoon, and he's never once fallen off. My daughter once milked 2 cows at once and didn't spill a drop. If you believed every claim, you'd think you were matchmaking among future saints and legendary heroes. The reality is usually a little muddier, a lot smellier, and, if you're lucky, genuinely earnest. Despite the mud, the hunger, and the occasional creative accounting, you do witness moments of real affection. Maybe it's just 2 people laughing over the absurdity of sharing a leaky barn, or a shy smile as someone offers the last turnip from their stew. Love, in the age of mud and mould, is practical, persistent, and often quiet. It's about having someone to help gather firewood, patch the roof, and commiserate over another day spent ankle-deep in cold water. Nobody's writing poetry, but everyone appreciates an extra woolen sock on a frosty night. By the end of each pairing, you've juggled livestock inventories, soothed at least one family feud over missing geese, and reassured anxious parents that, yes, sometimes marriages really do work out. There are no fancy feasts or legendary ballads, but there is a simple kind of hope, sturdy enough to last through another winter and flexible enough to survive a surprise potato blight. In the world of peasant matchmaking, love might not be grand, but it's absolutely necessary, and sometimes that's more than enough. At a medieval bride show, eligible women are paraded like livestock, and you're supposed to make everyone feel special. This requires the diplomatic skills of a minor saint. The first thing you notice at a bride show is the atmosphere, equal parts market day, pageant and mild public spectacle. The church bells ring out, mothers rush around fluffing bonnets and straightening aprons, and there's a palpable buzz in the air that's less about romance and more about pure, unfiltered competition. Every eligible maiden stands in a nervous line, cheeks pinched for colour and hair tamed as best as possible under the circumstances. There are fresh garlands of wildflowers, awkwardly borrowed dresses, and at least one mother frantically scrubbing mud off her daughter's hem while hissing, "Stand up straight, or I'll tell the priest about that thing you did with the eggs." As matchmaker, your role is somewhere between master of ceremonies and sheepdog. You're expected to introduce each young woman with just the right amount of fanfare, enough to highlight her strengths, but not so much that the other mothers begin plotting your demise. Here we have Margaret, whose bread never burns, and Edith, who once spun enough wool to clothe the whole parish. The trick is to rotate the compliments. Too much praise for one girl and suddenly you're dodging glares sharper than a freshly whetted sickle. Prospective suitors, usually accompanied by their parents, an uncle and a neighbour who is just there for the free samples, stroll up and down the line, squinting, sniffing, and making casual conversation that's somehow both more awkward and more invasive than a tax audit. The questions are direct and brutally practical. How many chickens can you pluck in an hour? Do you know how to cure bacon? Have you ever had a mysterious rash? You do your best to keep things civil, nudging conversations away from the truly embarrassing and toward the merely tolerable. Inevitably, there's a star of the bride show, the girl everyone whispers about, either because she's beautiful, comes with an impressive dowry, or has a family cow that's known for its miraculous milk yield. You spend extra energy making sure the other girls aren't completely overshadowed, reminding everyone of the time Mildred single-handedly chased a wolf away from the sheepfold, or that Agnes bakes the only rye bread that doesn't double as a weapon. It's matchmaking as damage control, trying to ensure no one goes home in tears, at least not until the market is over. The social tension is matched only by the behind-the-scenes manoeuvring. Mothers and aunts hover nearby, ready to whisper helpful reminders about their daughter's talents, or gently sabotage the competition with a well-timed comment about someone's suspect cheesemaking technique. Occasionally, two families will get into a quiet shoving match over who gets to stand closest to the parish well, which everyone knows is the spot with the best light for making freckles look fetching. You meanwhile are juggling more than just introductions. You're subtly playing matchmaker, mental calculator and therapist, all while keeping one eye out for trouble, like the time a goat wandered into the bride line and nearly started an international incident between rival farming clans. You make quick, strategic decisions, which pairings are worth nudging along, which suitors are only here for the spectacle, and which mothers are liable to start a brawl if things don't go their way. At the end of the day, the bride disperses in a swirl of relief, disappointment, and a little bit of hope. Some matches are made, some are quietly set aside, and everyone goes home with plenty to gossip about. As the village settles down, you collapse in exhaustion, grateful that, despite the chaos, no one was actually traded for a goat, and everyone's dignity is more or less intact. In the strange world of medieval romance, the bride show is as close as you'll ever get to speed dating, if speed dating included farm animals, relentless parents, and the constant threat of an onion-throwing contest. And yes, you'll do it all again next year. Sometimes two people just don't click, or worse, they click a little too well and immediately start planning a blood feud. Either way, you get blamed. Matchmaking, despite your best efforts, is never an exact science. You can compare sheep inventories, recite both family trees by heart, and even pray for a good omen at sunrise, but nothing guarantees that a match won't turn out to be a dud. Sometimes, the signs are obvious from the very first introduction. She wrinkles her nose at the sight of his boots, he forgets her name before the bread is served, and the conversation dies faster than a mayfly in a rainstorm. You see it coming, you try to steer the ship, but the winds of fate, and sometimes body odour, are simply too strong. Other times you're lulled into a false sense of security. The couple actually seem to enjoy talking about the latest livestock disaster. They both claim to like turnips. She laughs at his story about the goat that ate Father Oswin's vestments. For a fleeting moment you think, this could work. But then something small, an offhand remark about cheese storage, a disagreement over the best way to patch a leaky roof, spirals out of control. Suddenly the families are glaring across the feast table, accusations fly about ancient debts, and someone inevitably brings up the long-lost pig incident from 1371. Within minutes, your promising match has gone from potential lovebirds to arch-enemies with excellent recall of petty grievances. Of course, there's the third kind of dud, the explosive pair. These are the couples who are far too similar, whose chemistry is less spark and more arson. At first, everyone is delighted. They finish each other's sentences, they laugh at each other's jokes, they even help the same elderly neighbour carry firewood. But then, almost overnight, it devolves into a competition. Who can chop wood faster? Who can milk a goat one-handed? Who can win an argument about which saint is best for blessing the barley? The village is treated to a display of stubbornness so intense that neighbours take bets on which one will cave first. The answer, unfortunately, is neither. By the third week, the couple is feuding, their families are feuding, and you're pretty sure someone's written a folk song about it. And when the match fails, everyone looks to you. You said he was gentle. You told us she could cook. Didn't you notice his odd habit of collecting turnip-shaped rocks? Suddenly, your reputation as a trusted matchmaker is on the line, and even your best explanations, perhaps their humours were out of balance, don't seem to help. Sometimes the families demand a rematch. Other times they just demand compensation, like a loaf of bread or a chicken, as if that will somehow undo the week of awkward dinners and tense church services. You learn to spot the early warning signs of a dud, the polite but chilly silence after a first meeting, the rapid escalation of friendly banter into full-blown debate, the way one side of the family arrives armed with a suspiciously long list of grievances. You become a master of diffusing tension, inventing excuses to separate the pair. She needs to help her aunt churn butter, and quietly advising both families to give it some time. Sometimes you even recommend a temporary break. Let's revisit this after harvest, when everyone's less likely to throw onions. But the truth is, duds are inevitable. Not every match can be a fairy tale, especially in a world where survival often trumps romance. You remind yourself that even the best matchmakers get it wrong, sometimes spectacularly. So you do your best, patch up what you can, and try to learn from every disaster. Because in the end, nothing builds matchmaking wisdom quite like surviving a feud that started with love and ended with two angry villagers fighting over a very confused goat. Every match is carefully recorded, not for romance, but for plausible deniability when things go sideways in 6 months. Welcome to the real heart of medieval matchmaking. Paperwork. Or rather, whatever passes for paperwork when parchment is scarce, and ink is mostly crushed berries and wishful thinking. Your most valuable tool isn't a magic charm or a finely tuned sense of romance. It's your battered, dog-eared ledger, filled with hasty notes, frantic sketches, and the sort of abbreviations that would make a monk weep. Every potential match, every successful union, and every spectacular disaster gets its own entry, because you've learned that sooner or later someone will return, waving a stale loaf of bread and demanding to know why you ever thought their cousin Agnes was marriage material. Let's be honest, record-keeping is less about creating a legacy and more about survival. You have to remember who was paired with whom, when and where introductions happened, and most importantly the very specific reasons why you definitely did not recommend Margaret for anyone with allergies to goats. Your ledger is a jumble of important facts and pointed reminders. Edith, good with cheese, prone to melodrama. Oswin has all his teeth, as of Michaelmas. Robert and Maud, do not let them sit near each other at feasts. See turnip incident. You sometimes look back at your own notes and wonder if you're writing a matchmaking guide or an instruction manual for how to survive the next village council meeting. Keeping things organised is an ongoing struggle. Your system is whatever gets the job done. Scraps of parchment pinned together with a fishbone, symbols only you can decipher, and colour coding that mostly depends on what stains you had on hand that day. Still, it works. When someone storms up to you claiming their daughter was promised to a wealthy and sensible groom, you can flip straight to your notes and point out that technically he was only relatively prosperous and sometimes awake before noon. Accuracy is your shield. When things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you have a record to show you did in fact warn everyone about the perils of marrying into a family with a history of cheese-related feuds. Of course, the ledger isn't just for defensive purposes, it's also your memory. With so many names, faces, family trees, and dowry negotiations swirling around, you'd go mad trying to keep it all in your head. Want to know if Maud's family can really afford another pig this year? Check the notes, unsure whether Geoffrey's mysterious limp is new or chronic. The ledger knows all. It's a running diary of village fortunes, feuds, and the ever-important goat inventory, and sometimes it's the only thing stopping you from pairing two second cousins by accident. Or on purpose, if you're feeling especially bold and nobody's looking. The ledger also has a secret, slightly softer side. Amidst all the practical notes and dire warnings, you sometimes find a quiet record of small triumphs. Agnes and Wulfric, still smiling after first frost. Mildred and Robert, expecting twins, haven't thrown turnips at each other since Lammas. These reminders keep you going on the days when every family in the village seems to be blaming you for their collective romantic misfortunes. Sure, you record the disasters, never seat the Smiths and the Bakers together, bread riot risk. But you also get to witness the rare moments when your matchmaking actually works, if only for a little while. And so, as you add another frantic scribble to your ever-growing record of love, loss, and livestock, you take a little pride in your ledger. It may not look like much, half of it's held together with wax drips and sheer willpower, but it's your greatest defence against chaos. In a world where memories are long, grudges are longer, and romantic disasters are always just around the corner, your notes are the only thing standing between you and the next round of accusations. Plus, who else gets to write sea cheese catastrophe of 74 in their professional records? Only a medieval matchmaker. When the match is made, your job isn't done. Now you have to wrangle families, priests, livestock, and the occasional runaway groom. If you thought the hard part was over once you'd made a match, think again. Making the match is just Act 1. Act 2 is an all-consuming production that makes you question whether anyone in the medieval world actually wanted to get married in the first place. As soon as you announce the engagement, it's as if the entire village collectively loses its mind. You're immediately surrounded by mothers bursting with ideas for the ceremony, fathers arguing over dowry details, and at least one cousin loudly declaring that this time he will not be stuck peeling onions for the wedding feast. Your first challenge is logistics. The village church is booked for every major event from baptisms to exorcisms, so finding an open time slot is a miracle in itself. You negotiate with the priest, who insists that all banns be read, all debts be settled, and all participants arrive sober, which is asking a lot. Meanwhile, the families begin a contest over who can gather the most impressive array of wedding offerings: loaves of bread, jugs of ale, and that one slightly famous chicken that once survived a fox attack. Every gift has to be catalogued, negotiated, and in at least one case, politely refused because it came with a curse guarantee. Then comes the seating plan, a diplomatic tightrope walk. The Smiths and Bakers are still not on speaking terms after the Great Rye dispute. The groom's aunt and the bride's grandmother are locked in a feud about whether the stew should be thick or thin. You, armed with your matchmaker's ledger, try to assign seats in such a way that nobody ends up within arm's reach of a known bread thrower. It's like arranging a peace summit, only with more barnyard animals. And let's not forget the animals. There will be livestock whether you like it or not. Someone always insists on bringing a prized goat for luck, and at least one pig manages to slip away just as the priest is about to start the ceremony. You end up chasing chickens out of the nave, scrubbing mud off the best tablecloth, and praying that nobody notices the faint smell of manure that clings to everything, no matter how much rosemary you wave around. In the background, the bride and groom are usually somewhere between panic and denial. The bride worries about whether her veil is long enough, whether the wildflowers look too wilted, and whether her mother will finally reveal the family secret about what really happened to the first wedding dress. The groom is either missing, last seen running toward the woods, or being lectured about marital responsibilities by an uncle who hasn't actually been married since the year of the bad harvest. It's your job to wrangle both parties back to the altar, often with a combination of stern pep talks, gentle reminders, and, when necessary, strategic application of leftover cake. The day itself is a controlled disaster. Villagers gather in their cleanest shirts, the children are mostly clean, and the air is thick with excitement, anxiety, and the lingering scent of onions. There's a flurry of last-minute adjustments as you chase down missing rings, reattach flower garlands, and break up a pre-ceremony argument about which saint should be thanked first. Somehow, as the bells begin to ring, everyone finds their place. The mismatched pews, the overcrowded feast table, the official wedding goat at the very front. After the vows are exchanged and the priest has blessed everything in sight, you allow yourself a sigh of relief. You've done it. The families might still bicker. The stew may yet cause another round of disputes. But for one shining moment, everyone is united in celebration. You watch as the new couple, nervous but smiling, walks into their future, and you know you've earned every crumb of wedding cake and every sly nod from grateful parents. And as the feast begins, you sneak off for a well-deserved rest, already dreading the next request for your matchmaking services, because in medieval wedding preparations, no good deed ever goes unpunished. The day after the wedding, there's always a dispute about goats, or beds, or whether that cow was pre-milked. You are now an amateur contract lawyer. The wedding feast is barely over, the last turnip pie cooling on the windowsill when the real fun begins, the dowry disputes. While the bride and groom are busy adjusting to married life, awkward silences, new chores, and the sudden realization that love doesn't wash the laundry, you're dragged straight into the medieval version of small claims court. If you thought romance was complicated, try sorting out who gets custody of the only goat that knows how to open the garden gate. Every family enters negotiations with a selective memory and a very different version of what was promised. The groom's mother swears there were supposed to be 2 geese and a wool blanket. The bride's uncle insists it was only 1 goose, and the blanket is being borrowed indefinitely. And that cow, everyone claims it's theirs, except when it kicks someone, at which point it apparently belongs to the neighbours. You stand there with your trusty ledger, now looking more like a medieval legal tome, reading off what you wrote in the faint hope that someone respects the authority of your ink-stained scribbles. Cows are a particular flashpoint. Was it meant to come with the bride, or was it simply visiting for the duration of the feast? If it's mysteriously dried up overnight, the accusations start flying. You milked her before the wedding to make her look better, one side hisses, while the other denies everything and points out the suspiciously smug look on the goat's face. There are arguments about whether a sheep counted as new if it had already survived 2 winters, and whether a piglet is a piglet or a future hog. This is the level of medieval legal wrangling that would make a modern judge weep. Of course, it isn't just livestock. Bedding, cookware, the spare axe, everything is up for debate. You become an impromptu mediator, reminding everyone that the axe was for communal woodcutting, not a private weapon, and that the kitchen pots are to be shared unless otherwise infested. Sometimes someone brings up the family candlestick, last seen at the wedding but now suspiciously missing. It's rarely about the object itself, it's about pride, status, and the hope that nobody else will come out ahead. You quickly learn that your job as a matchmaker doesn't end at the altar. You spend the days after the wedding making house calls, negotiating truce after truce, and listening to stories so convoluted you wonder if everyone's secretly auditioning for a village drama troupe. The arguments can stretch on for weeks, until finally someone tires out, gives in, or decides the goat isn't worth the headache. Some disputes are solved with wit and compromise. If you take the cow, you must also take cousin Oswin for 2 weeks. Others end with symbolic gestures, a loaf of bread exchanged or a pie baked in apology, sometimes with suspiciously crunchy bits, but it's the thought that counts. If you're clever, you can diffuse tension with a joke about the sheep's bad attitude, or the time the pig escaped during last year's harvest dance. But there's always the looming threat of a full-blown feud. If a dowry dispute goes unresolved, families might stop speaking, sabotage each other's gardens, or in extreme cases, leave snarky notes at church. You find yourself playing diplomat, lawyer, and sometimes referee, standing between 2 sides waving wooden spoons like dueling swords. In the end, most disputes simmer down to resigned shrugs and reluctant handshakes. Everyone agrees, publicly at least, that the marriage is more important than the missing chicken. You close your ledger, head home, and count yourself lucky that nobody decided to settle the matter with pitchforks. Until the next wedding anyway. Because in medieval matchmaking, there's always another dowry to dispute, another goat to chase, and another pot to argue over. And you, the humble matchmaker, get to preside over it all. One bickering family at a time. If you think modern wedding receptions are awkward, wait until you've seen a medieval feast where the main dish is boiled cabbage and someone's cousin keeps sobbing into the gravy. As the matchmaker, you're expected to attend, smile, and pretend you're not silently cataloguing every awkward moment for your private ledger of disasters. The medieval wedding feast is an event that's equal parts celebration and chaos, a boisterous mix of uninvited relatives, questionable culinary choices, and the ever-present possibility of a small barnyard incident right in the middle of the toasts. You can hear the revelry before you even arrive, the clatter of wooden cups, the off-key lute being valiantly strummed by the village's only musician, and the distinct wailing of a toddler who has either eaten too much pie or not enough. The food, of course, sets the tone for everything. No matter how many sheep are slaughtered or loaves are baked, the star of the show is almost always a mound of aggressively boiled cabbage. There's gruel, a suspiciously grey stew, and bread so dense it could be used for home repairs. Yet, despite the questionable menu, everyone piles their plates high and digs in with the enthusiasm of people who survived on onion soup all winter. As the ale flows, tongues loosen and the air fills with toasts, each one longer and more heartfelt than the last. There are blessings from the priest, heavy on warnings about temptation, cheerful predictions from the neighbours, may your pigs always find their way home, and, inevitably, a drunken speech from the groom's uncle about his own wedding, which may or may not have involved a goat and a blizzard. Amid the revelry, family drama bubbles just beneath the surface. At least one cousin spends the entire evening weeping into the gravy, either from joy, heartbreak, or a mild onion allergy. Nobody can tell. The bride's younger brother sulks in the corner because he wasn't allowed to bring his pet duck. The two oldest grandmothers lock eyes across the table, silently dueling over whose recipe for plum pudding is superior. Every so often, a bread roll sails through the air as an argument about dowry terms reignites, only to be quickly hushed by a chorus of, "Think of the children." You, meanwhile, keep an eye on everything. Who's drinking a little too much, who's eyeing the leftover cheese, who's making discreet notes about next year's eligible singles. You intervene when the feuding families threaten to escalate, perhaps with a well-timed joke or a diversion involving an impromptu dance. Your real skill lies in knowing when to steer the conversation back to neutral territory. So, about those turnips this season, and when to let the tension boil away in a round of loud, off-key singing. Then there are the traditions. After the meal, someone produces the lucky wedding pie, filled with anything from coins to peas to the village's last surviving prune. Children scramble under the table searching for crumbs, and the elders line up to offer advice that ranges from genuinely wise to absolutely baffling. Never trust a pig that eats facing north. Before the night is over, there's dancing, clumsy, joyful, and occasionally hazardous, when combined with too much ale and not enough lighting. No medieval wedding feast is complete without at least one mishap. Maybe the dog steals a roast, or a goose escapes from its pen and is chased around the hall by laughing children. Someone accidentally knocks over the priest's cup, which everyone pretends not to notice. The newlyweds look both elated and terrified, clutching each other as if to anchor themselves amid the madness. As the festivities wind down, the guests begin to drift home, leaving behind a trail of breadcrumbs, muddy footprints, and a sense that life will, against all odds, carry on. You, the matchmaker, slip away as quietly as possible, grateful that the only thing truly broken was the bread, and that, despite the cabbage, the tears and the tense negotiations, another village feast has ended in more laughter than war. That, in medieval matchmaking, is about as close to happily ever after as anyone gets. Once the happy couple is officially miserable together, your real challenge begins, dodging blame, deflecting complaints, and pretending you don't know what that smell is. In the glow of the wedding feast, everyone is hopeful that the new couple will get along, that the dowry animals won't escape, and that the stew won't return in their dreams. But in medieval matchmaking, optimism is always just a little bit naive. It's only after the vows are said, the garlands have wilted, and the last cousin's headache has subsided that the real reality sets in. That's when people start coming to your door. Again At first, the new couple's troubles are small. She doesn't like the way he snores. He can't stand her pet chicken, who seems to have a vendetta against his boots. They argue about who forgot to patch the roof, who burned the bread, and who keeps leaving muddy footprints on the rushes. At this point, your job is mostly to listen and nod sympathetically, dispensing the same well-worn advice your grandmother gave you. Try complimenting her turnips. Let him win at dice once in a while, or remember, love is stronger than goat smell, most of the time. But soon enough, things start getting weird. Rumours creep through the village like a particularly persistent draft. You hear about the couple who sleep in separate corners of the hut because it's warmer that way, or the bride who still visits her mother 3 times a day for advice. Someone insists their in-laws cursed the butter, while another claims the family cat is communicating dire warnings with its tail. Every oddity, every quirk, and every complaint somehow lands back on your doorstep. You've officially become the village's unpaid therapist, referee, and, when the argument gets particularly heated, the designated taster for suspiciously spicy stew. It isn't just the couple either. The families get involved, offering support in the form of unsolicited advice and subtle sabotage. One mother-in-law insists on reorganising the new couple's entire hut for luck. An uncle starts a rumour that sleeping with onions under the bed will restore harmony. The groom's little sister swears she saw a ghost in the garden, which is immediately blamed for all marital woes. You do your best to stay out of these family storms, but somehow you're always being asked to weigh in on whether the bride's bread really is less springy than before. Sometimes you face bigger problems, ones even a seasoned matchmaker can't solve. There are couples who realise far too late that they are in fact related, thanks fourth cousin rule, or who end up embroiled in a dowry dispute that refuses to die. There's the occasional runaway spouse, and even more occasionally, a runaway pig that was supposed to seal the marriage deal, but instead decided to join a travelling minstrel troupe. In each case, the village expects you to fix it, because, let's face it, you're the one who put these people together. If things get particularly out of hand, you've learned to disappear for a few days, claiming an urgent need to consult a distant relative about a plague of beetles. Despite all this, the aftermath is often where the most genuine moments of love, or at least tolerance, are found. Couples who survive their first winter together learn to laugh at each other's quirks and settle into the muddy, cabbage-scented rhythm of married life. Every so often, someone comes to thank you, not with coins, but with a jar of honey or a story about how their spouse finally fixed the door without being asked. These rare thank yous make the blame, complaints, and mysterious smells almost worth it. As the seasons turn and new hopefuls line up at your door, you realise that in the grand, messy scheme of medieval matchmaking, the aftermath is less about living happily ever after, and more about surviving with a sense of humour and enough soap to last until spring. Pairing up widows and widowers is a delicate task. Was their last spouse a tragic accident, or a warning sign? Sometimes both. In the world of medieval matchmaking, nothing keeps you on your toes quite like the business of second chances. It sounds simple. 2 people who've already survived the wild carnival of marriage get a shot at happiness again. But in practice, this is matchmaking on expert mode, with a healthy side of suspicion and a dash of superstition. Widows and widowers come with baggage, and sometimes it's literal. A trunk of old clothes, a mysterious box nobody's allowed to open, or a collection of unsettlingly detailed stories about the old days. You quickly learn that every repeat customer in the marriage market has a tale to tell, and not all of them are comforting bedtime stories. The first thing you have to do is some very careful sleuthing. Why is this eligible person back in circulation? There are many perfectly innocent reasons. Illness, plague, an unfortunate accident involving a cider barrel. But you'd be foolish not to ask questions. Is this their first time at the matchmaking rodeo, or their third? Did their previous spouse die peacefully? Or does every village child know the tale of the infamous turnip stew incident that took poor Oswin before his time? You dig into the gossip, check the parish records, and quietly ask around about what really happened last winter. The difference between tragic accident and final warning is thin as a parsnip slice. And yet, pairing up two seasoned souls has its advantages. Widows and widowers, unlike nervous first-timers, know what they're in for. They have a keen appreciation for the practicalities of partnership, sharing chores, surviving winter, and the value of a spouse who can fix a leaky roof. There's less fuss about courtship, fewer wild dreams about love at first sight, and a much greater focus on whether the match will bring enough firewood, cheese, or quiet evenings by the hearth. You often hear conversations like, "I don't snore and I have my own teeth," met with, "I make soup that won't kill you," usually. But don't be fooled, there's plenty of drama. Some families are all for a second marriage, eager to see their relatives settled and out of the house. Others are less enthusiastic, suspicious that a new partner is just after the family's last goat or the prime bit of cabbage field. Adult children hover at the edge of every conversation, making polite noises while glaring daggers, as if you're about to sign away the family fortune in exchange for an extra bed warmer. Then there's the subject of legacies. Widows and widowers may have property, livestock, or a few treasured keepsakes from the last marriage. Negotiating what belongs to whom is a game of chess played with kitchenware, sheep, and the all-important wedding ladle. Sometimes the negotiation turns testy. That candlestick was a gift from my first wife, and that cow is the only thing my late husband left me. You tread carefully, acting as both mediator and referee, trying not to let things devolve into a shouting match about bed sheets and milking stools. Of course, there are still those second-chance romances that surprise everyone, especially the couple themselves. Maybe it's two people who've weathered loss and loneliness, finding comfort in each other's company and a sense of humour about the indignities of life. There's a different kind of spark here, one that's less likely to burst into flames and more likely to keep the home fires burning all winter. You take extra pride in these matches, knowing you've helped stitch together a bit of hope where there was only resignation. By the end of every widow and widower pairing, you've balanced legacies, soothed anxieties, and explained, again, that just because 3 previous spouses died mysteriously doesn't mean there's a curse, probably. If you can bring a little companionship and security to someone who thought those days were behind them, you count it as a victory. And if you avoid triggering a feud over a 3-legged chair or a haunted soup pot, all the better. In the end, second chances are a reminder that, in medieval matchmaking, hope springs eternal, even if sometimes it smells faintly of turnips. Medieval matchmaking is a supernatural minefield. Did the candle flicker the wrong way? Is it unlucky to propose on a Tuesday? Why is everyone suddenly obsessed with birthmarks? Every step you take as a matchmaker is watched, not just by anxious families and nosy neighbours, but also by a chorus of mysterious signs and portents. It starts before dawn, with the villagers peering suspiciously at the sky. Did the clouds form the shape of a fish? Or is that just wishful thinking from the fisherman's daughter? Nothing is decided on mere logic. Every match hangs in the balance of omens, folk wisdom, and the mysterious behaviour of the local animals. A marriage proposal, it turns out, is less about romantic intent and more about negotiating with fate and that cat in the alley who never blinks. Your day is a swirl of superstitions. Never discuss dowries when the moon is waning, warns an old aunt, clutching a string of garlic. Only marry in months with an R in them, or the chickens will lay bad eggs for a year. There are endless rules about lucky days and forbidden times. Proposing on a Tuesday means eternal bickering, while a Friday wedding guarantees the couple will fight over soup. You dutifully consult the village calendar, cross-checking it with local legends and the advice of at least 3 grumpy elders before scheduling anything. In the rare event that all signs point to yes, you breathe a sigh of relief. If the omens disagree, you might as well try again next season. But it's not just the days and the weather. Everything in the environment is fair game for the matchmaking omens. A toad croaking beneath the window at dawn is a sign that the bride will be stubborn. as if you needed an amphibian to tell you that. If a rooster crows 3 times during the introduction, everyone agrees the groom is doomed to a life of cold porridge. Even the placement of shoes, left foot in front for luck, right foot for wealth, can mean the difference between a happy marriage and an annual cheese shortage. You spend so much time watching for signs you start to see patterns in the potato peels. And then there are the birthmarks. Medieval villagers are convinced that every blot, freckle or oddly shaped mole carries a deeper meaning. A mark shaped like a heart is a guarantee of true love, while anything resembling a potato is a warning of hard times ahead. Before every match, mothers will anxiously point out their daughter's lucky spot, hoping to tip the scales in their favour. You become an expert in creative interpretation. Why, yes, that mark does look a bit like St. Bridget's staff. Surely a good omen. Animals too are treated as walking oracles. If the family cat takes an interest in the suitor, all is well. If the cat hisses, or worse, just stares in utter silence, it's a sign to reconsider. You've learned to pay attention to the cat, not out of any real belief, but because if you ignore it, the family will never forgive you if the marriage turns sour. Some days, you're half convinced the animals are in on the joke, arranging themselves for maximum dramatic effect. All of this means that you, the matchmaker, must be both a diplomat and a part-time wizard. You keep a list of lucky charms in your pocket: rabbit's foot, horseshoe nail, a crust of bread from the last happy wedding, and scatter them judiciously as needed. You're expected to read tea leaves, even when nobody drinks tea, and to deliver cryptic pronouncements about the direction of the wind. The geese are flying north. Very auspicious. Let's meet again after market day. In the end, the power of superstition is less about fate, and more about giving people a sense of control in a world where so much is uncertain. If everyone believes a happy marriage depends on a lucky pebble or a particularly opinionated cat, who are you to argue? You smile, nod, and keep your fingers crossed. Because in the business of medieval matchmaking, you never want to be the one who ignored a sign, especially if the cat is still staring at you. Want your child married first? Perhaps you sweeten the deal with a chicken, some silver, or a pie so mysterious you're not sure it's legal. No one ever tells you that being a medieval matchmaker means running a side business in not-so-subtle bribery. But there it is, woven into every layer of your daily life, the currency of gifts, offerings, and the occasional baked good with uncertain contents. The matchmaking business is already complex, part social chess game, part detective story, and part local theatre. Add in the steady parade of mothers bearing tokens of gratitude, and you're suddenly less a village elder and more a very well-fed, slightly nervous judge in a never-ending pie contest. It starts out innocently enough. Maybe the mother of an eligible daughter leaves a freshly laid egg on your doorstep, just a little something to show her appreciation for your hard work. Maybe a father drops off a pouch of coins to help with the ink for your ledger. But the gifts quickly escalate. Before you know it, you're being offered a whole roast chicken, still warm, a string of beads from the Holy Land, or maybe just the next town over, and, if someone is truly desperate, a bottle of something so strong it could polish your boots. The real artistry of the bribe economy is in its deniability. No one ever says outright, "I want you to marry my son off first." Instead, it's all winks and nudges, cryptic remarks about remembering who looks out for you, and suspiciously generous portions of honey cake at the next feast. You, the matchmaker, become an expert at graciously accepting gifts while pretending they have absolutely no bearing on your decisions. Of course, you have your limits. You draw the line at accepting anything still moving, anything that hisses, and anything labelled experimental sausage. Suspicious pies deserve a category of their own. These mysterious pastries arrive at all hours, covered with latticework and secrets. Some are delicious, filled with apples, pears, or sweetened curds. Others, not so much. There's always that one pie that contains something special, the kind of ingredient only someone's great-aunt would think is edible. You quickly develop a system. First, smell it. Second, offer a slice to the neighbour's cat. Third, watch for side effects. If all is well, you accept the pie and make a note in your ledger. Mildred, good baker, slightly aggressive with nutmeg. If not, you have a secret spot behind the woodshed for experimental offerings. The bribe economy is not just about food. You might receive a pair of knitted socks just your size, a hand-carved spoon, or even a dubious amulet blessed by a monk who once visited Canterbury. You smile, say thank you, and make sure every gift giver feels noticed. Every offering is a small reminder that in this world, social standing isn't just about land or sheep. It's about being clever enough to tip the scales in your favour, even if it's with a lopsided loaf of bread. Of course, the most skilled bribers are the ones who use their influence quietly. Perhaps they offer to help patch your roof, mend your cloak, or watch your chickens while you're off arranging matches in the next village. You soon find yourself balancing favours, quietly noting which families are particularly generous, and which ones once tried to bribe you with pickled fish. Never again. When the time comes to make introductions, you weigh the gifts, the gossip, and the good old-fashioned suitability, always striving to keep things fair, or at least fair enough that no one shows up at your door waving a rolling pin. At the end of the day, the bribe economy is less about greed and more about tradition, a way for anxious families to feel involved, a method for expressing hope, and a reminder that everyone deep down wants to stack the odds in their favour. You accept the gifts with a wink, keep the ledger straight, and never, ever admit just how much you've learned about pie. Because in medieval matchmaking, it's not just about love or dowries, it's about who can bake the best cake, who can bribe with the softest socks, and who knows the true value of a well-timed offering. After a long day of questionable decisions and frantic mothers, you reflect on your life. Maybe you could have been a blacksmith, or a wandering juggler, or literally anything else. Regret isn't something you plan for when you take up the noble and chaotic calling of medieval matchmaking. At first, it all seemed so straightforward. Bring together two lonely hearts, bask in the gratitude of the families, and maybe collect a thank you pie or the occasional scarf. How hard could it be? As it turns out, very. In fact, after a typical day mediating bread feuds, explaining for the fourth time that no, you can't guarantee a dowry goat will always give milk, and pretending not to hear the village priest mutter about interfering in the Lord's business, you find yourself daydreaming about other, less exhausting careers. Blacksmiths, after all, just argue with metal. Farmers yell at crops. Minstrels only have to remember 3 chords and a rhyme for mud. Your job, on the other hand, is to keep half the village from throttling the other half, while secretly praying no one finds out you accidentally matched third cousins last winter. Even as you trudge home through the puddles, the echoes of the day follow you. The shrill protests of mothers certain their darling daughters were overlooked. The subtle threats disguised as neighbourly advice from fathers convinced you favoured the next hamlet over. The endless passive-aggressive exchanges between 2 rival families, each one promising you just a taste of their best honey if you happen to make the right choice. Some days you think you'd trade it all for the chance to repair shoes or even herd geese. At least geese don't gossip. The regret comes in waves. The first is mild, the quiet, constant ache of your feet and the ever-present smell of someone else's cheese. But by nightfall, after your 5th lecture on why you can't guarantee the marriage won't be cursed because a cat blinked at the wrong moment, you start to wonder if your life could have taken a less stressful turn. Maybe you could have joined your cousin on the open road as a travelling juggler. Sure, you're clumsy, but dropping a few beanbags is easier than juggling the hopes and neuroses of the entire parish. Perhaps you could have been a scribe, writing epic tales of other people's disasters instead of starring in them. Or a monk, copying manuscripts in blessed silence with only ink stains to contend with. But as much as you fantasize about other paths, reality always snaps you back. Maybe it's the knock at your door, the late-night confession from a lovesick shepherd, or the urgent plea from a family whose prized duck has gone missing. Again. Maybe it's the realization that, for better or worse, you're needed. That somewhere, Between the botched introductions, disputed dowries and awkward wedding feasts, you have actually made a difference. Sure, you've made mistakes, some matches that fizzled out before the first frost, others that ended in legendary turnip feuds. But you've also brought a little hope and a lot of gossip to a world that, if nothing else, is desperate for a good story. There's a certain comfort in knowing you're not alone in your regrets. Every villager, from the grumpiest grandfather to the sleepiest midwife, wonders if they might have been better off doing something else. Yet each one, in their own way, keeps the strange, stubborn, hilarious machine of medieval village life running. As you close your ledger at the end of another day, you remind yourself, regret is just another part of the job. It's a sign you care, a reminder that despite the chaos, you're still holding out hope that the next match will be the one where everything finally goes right. So you pour yourself a cup of whatever passes for wine, tuck in your weary feet, and resolve to do it all again tomorrow. Because in the end, questionable life choices are what make the very best stories. And in the world of medieval matchmaking, there's always another tale waiting to unfold, usually involving at least one goat, 2 suspicious pies, and a decision you'll probably regret in the morning. At the end of the day, as you dodge one last furious parent and wipe cabbage from your shoe, you realise why this job is both essential and impossibly stressful. You survived, barely. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, assuming you haven't been run out of town by breakfast. The sun is setting over the village, painting the muddy lanes and crooked rooftops in a soft golden light that, if you squint, almost makes everything look peaceful. You're shuffling home, exhausted, your brain a foggy ledger of names, dowries, and mysterious marital feuds. Your tunic smells faintly of onions, livestock, and desperation. You pause to shake loose a wilted piece of cabbage that's glued itself to your boot, courtesy of an overzealous aunt with opinions about salad and matchmaking alike. This is the glamorous life you've chosen. It's in these quiet moments, when the village finally begins to settle and the arguments fade into background muttering, that you truly grasp the absurd weight of your job. The day started before sunrise with mothers banging on your door and didn't let up until the last wedding guest tripped over the church steps. You've negotiated peace treaties between rival goose herders, consoled jilted lovers, and resolved at least 3 disputes over who actually owned that suspiciously bald sheep. You've doled out advice, tactfully ignored insults, and collected enough thank you pies to feed the entire parish for a week, assuming nobody minds a little experimental spice or the odd pebble. The reality is, matchmaking is not just about bringing people together, it's 1,000 small tasks, constant diplomacy, and the occasional need to run for your life when a dowry negotiation goes sour. You carry everyone's hopes, grudges, and occasionally a bribe disguised as a suspiciously heavy sack of potatoes. Your victories are rarely celebrated for long, and your failures are legendary, told and retold at every market stall until you could recite the tragic tale of Edith and the turnip debacle in your sleep. And yet, despite the headaches and heartaches, you're weirdly proud of the chaos. Who else can say they've survived a wedding feast where the main course was boiled cabbage and the after-dinner entertainment was a brawl over missing candlesticks? Or that they've managed to keep the smiths and the millers from open warfare for yet another week, simply by sitting them at opposite ends of the church? The truth is, this job is less about love and more about endurance, resilience, and a stubborn refusal to give up, even when faced with 3 angry mothers and a chicken with revenge in its eyes. You think for a moment about how most people would last as a medieval matchmaker. Not long, if they're lucky. The endless lines of hopeful, desperate, or downright peculiar clients. The late-night knocks on your door with requests for love potions or advice on how to charm a suspicious cat. The risk of being blamed for every marital squabble and runaway goat. You'd need the patience of a saint, the memory of an elephant, and the skin of a particularly tough turnip. And let's face it, most people are more turnip than saint. As darkness falls, you take one last look at the quiet, chaotic village and realise The reason you wouldn't last a day as a medieval matchmaker isn't just the work or the mud or the threat of cabbage-based retribution. It's that nobody ever truly leaves their work behind. The job follows you in whispered rumours and hopeful glances, in thankless tasks and the rare, genuine moments of gratitude when you see a couple, just one, laughing together at the end of it all. You survived, and tomorrow you'll be up before the dawn ready to do it all again. That is, unless someone finally takes your advice and runs off to become a wandering juggler. In that case, you'll happily trade places, cabbage stains and all. Medieval teenagers want what they can't have: freedom, privacy, and someone who isn't their second cousin. As the matchmaker, you're the only thing standing between adolescent dreams and the all-seeing eyes of every parent in a 10-mile radius. It's like chaperoning a barn dance, except the barn keeps catching fire. Your days as a matchmaker would be challenging enough if everyone involved were sensible adults who understood that marriage was mostly about sharing chores, pooling goats, and keeping the mud out of the house. But then there are the teenagers, the true wild cards of medieval romance. At first glance, they look just like their parents, only with fewer teeth lost to hard bread and more hope left in their eyes. Underneath that optimism, though, is a cauldron of swirling hormones, secret crushes, and the desperate need to rebel against anything and everything, especially if it's approved by a parent or blessed by a priest. You start every teen matchmaking with high hopes and low expectations. He's a good boy, never once set fire to the barn on purpose, a mother assures you, with a pointed look at her son. Meanwhile, the intended girl is rolling her eyes so hard you worry they might get stuck. No one in history has ever wanted to be set up by their mother, and medieval teens are no exception. The difference is, these teens can't escape by hiding in their room with headphones. They have to sneak out past a rooster, 3 geese, and the ever-vigilant eyes of their grandmother, who remembers every scandal since the year of the bad cabbage. Every interaction is a balancing act. You arrange a chance meeting at the well, or a shared chore involving firewood, and stand a discreet 10 feet away to make sure no one runs for the hills or jumps in the river out of embarrassment. Sometimes there's a spark, an awkward joke, a shared smile, a quick glance, but most of the time it's pure chaos. The girl's little brother is spying from the bushes. Someone's aunt is pretending to look for herbs but is really listening in. And then there's the boy who, overcome with nerves, trips over his own feet and ends up covered in goat dung before he can say a word. The biggest challenge is that every adult in the village is also on high alert. Medieval parents are expert surveillance operatives, forever peeking from behind curtains, lurking in doorways, or outright marching into the field to check on the turnips at the precise moment a shy teenage hand is extended. You try to create opportunities for genuine conversation, but there's always a mother or an uncle ready to step in with advice about the old ways, or a dire warning about what happens to those who fall in love before Michaelmas. And let's not forget the biggest obstacle of all, family trees. In a village of 50 people, avoiding second cousins is a logistical nightmare that would stump even the best royal genealogist. You spend half your time cross-referencing family histories, and the other half explaining to disappointed teens that, yes, their one true love is technically related, and no, it doesn't count as romantic if they met at the last sheep-shearing festival. The truth is, teenage romance in medieval times is a storm of yearning, confusion, and strict supervision. As the matchmaker, you're referee, therapist, and sometimes bouncer at the barn dance. When things go well, you get a smile and maybe a shy thank you. When things go wrong, say, a barn actually catches fire, you're blamed for fanning the flames of youthful indiscretion. Still, every once in a while you witness something wonderful. A pair of teenagers who manage to find common ground, a shy walk home from church, or a shared laugh over the absurdity of being set up by their mothers. You file these small victories away and prepare for the next disaster, because in medieval matchmaking, the only thing more unpredictable than teenage love is the next barn to catch fire. Sometimes a match falls apart before it makes it to the altar. Maybe someone's sheep inheritance was wildly exaggerated, or maybe one side suddenly finds God and runs off to a monastery. You get to break the news, collect the tears, and try to regift a chicken nobody wants. If you think the hardest part of matchmaking is getting two people to agree to marry, think again. Sometimes, just when everything seems settled, dowries negotiated, families appeased, church banns read, fate, or a neighbour's loudmouth child, intervenes and your carefully woven web unravels in spectacular fashion. Broken engagements are the bane of every medieval matchmaker's existence. They're messier than a spilled pot of cabbage soup and almost always accompanied by angry relatives, suspiciously specific gossip, and a leftover animal or two that nobody wants to claim. It usually starts with a rumour. Did you hear? Oswin isn't as rich in sheep as he says. Half his flock is imaginary. Or maybe someone notices that Edith, newly betrothed, has suddenly developed an urgent vocation for the nunnery. Sometimes the red flag is as simple as an aunt remembering, mid-negotiation, that her late husband once swore never to marry into the family of anyone who puts onions in everything. When you hear the whispers, or more often when someone marches up to your door waving an unpaid bread bill and demanding answers, you know it's time for crisis management. Your first job is fact-checking, which in a medieval village means a lot of walking, a little eavesdropping, and more than one awkward conversation with people who claim they're just concerned neighbours. You tally sheep, investigate mysterious illnesses, and double-check that the prospective bride's mother didn't exaggerate about the family's famed apple orchard. More often than not, you discover that both families were telling the truth, just not the whole truth. Maybe the sheep really are impressive, but only from a distance. Maybe the apple orchard yields exactly 3 apples a year, 2 of which are inedible. Once the truth is out and the engagement officially dissolves, emotions run high. There's wailing and gnashing of teeth, accusations of betrayal, and at least one mother threatening to move to the next village where people appreciate honesty. You, the matchmaker, are caught in the crossfire, trying to soothe feelings while retrieving any engagement gifts, like the aforementioned chicken, who is now so traumatized by the drama it refuses to lay eggs. You do your best to redistribute gifts to new hopefuls, but word gets around and nobody wants to be associated with the jinxed poultry. Then come the attempts at damage control. The church wants an explanation for why the bans must be stopped. The village gossips double their efforts, gleefully dissecting every failed match as proof that love is doomed and dowries are never what they seem. You're forced to invent diplomatic phrases. It wasn't meant to be. Perhaps the stars weren't right, or the classic, sometimes a chicken just isn't enough. You offer your services as a counsellor, a listening ear, and, when all else fails, a distraction. Who wants to help chase the runaway pig? It's not all tears and tantrums. Occasionally a broken engagement is met with relief by one or both parties. Maybe they didn't want to get married in the first place. Maybe the only thing more frightening than life with each other was life with each other's extended family. You quietly encourage everyone to see it as a learning experience, and then begin the slow process of convincing the villagers that it's safe to trust your matchmaking again. You remind yourself that even in medieval times, not every love story goes according to plan. There are no return policies, no refunds, just a lot of patience, gentle words, and the hope that the next match will stick. And as for that leftover chicken, you give it one more try at the next introduction, but deep down you know, some matches, like some poultry, just aren't meant to be. Does absence make the heart grow fonder, or just hopelessly confused? When would-be lovers live in neighbouring villages, every message is a heroic saga. Mud, wolves, and the world's worst love poetry written on goatskin included. If matchmaking is tricky when everyone's within earshot, it becomes an epic headache when romance must cross not one, but 2 parishes, each with its own suspicious elders, sharp-eyed church ladies, and particularly vicious geese. In medieval times, long-distance love is less about yearning, and more a marathon of patience, stamina, and deciphering terrible handwriting. You, the matchmaker, aren't just advisor and confidant. You're a battered boot delivery service risking life, limb, and dignity for 2 sweethearts who, odds are, may never even meet. Let's start with communication. No texts, no mail. Just you, trudging through the mud, trying to avoid being chased by an angry rooster. Each note, usually penned by a shy, lovesick suitor, is handed to you like it's the Magna Carta. The prose never improves. To my dearest Matilda, I miss you as a cow misses spring grass. Your hair is like wheat, if wheat were brown and a little muddy. You do your best not to snicker as you tuck the goatskin parchment away and head off on your next muddy mission. The hazards are legendary. There's the ever-present mud determined to claim your boots. There are wolves, or rumours of them, fueled by every village granny, and gangs of children desperate for gossip pestering you for a peek at your messages. You master the art of decoy notes. Aunt Agnes wants more onions to protect the real secrets. If the roads wash out, you might end up sleeping in a barn with only a goat for company and the existential dread of another soggy trek at dawn. Delivering the note is only the beginning. You wait while Matilda reads and tries not to look crushed by Oswin's poetry. Then you're handed a reply, even more cryptic, and the cycle repeats. Tell Oswin his handwriting is much improved. And no, I have not seen his hat. These exchanges can last for weeks. Courtship by instalments, muddied by weather and miscommunication. Meanwhile, both families bombard you with questions about dowries, wedding dates, or whether Matilda's cousin might be a better match. The lovers grow more anxious with each note. Absence does strange things to the heart, and by the end, even the mud is romanticised. Should the two finally meet, the whole village gathers, eager for a scandal or at least a memorable argument. If love blooms, you're relieved. If not, brace for more messages, now filled with heartbreak and pleas to find someone closer next time. Even after it's over, you're left holding the history, every poem, every regret, every sigh about muddy roads. Sometimes you reread the silliest notes by candlelight, proof that people, against all odds, still believe in love, even if it has to travel by goatskin, grit, and the world's muddiest messenger. In the end, medieval long-distance love is awkward, messy, and sweet. A testament to stubborn hope and a reminder that love will always find a way, no matter how many muddy miles stand in its path. So tonight, as you stretch out in your clean bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of electronics and the blessed absence of angry parents waving turnips, take a moment to be grateful for the weird, wild journey you've just survived. In a single day as a medieval matchmaker, you've dodged furious mothers, negotiated the politics of pig ownership, and somehow orchestrated romance between people who still think romantic means sharing the nice spoon. You've navigated dowry disputes, endured wedding feasts where the bread could double as a weapon, and faced enough awkward silences to last several lifetimes. You've been bribed, blamed, and possibly hexed by an elderly aunt who swears you overlooked her grandnephew on purpose. And through it all, you've witnessed the wild, stubborn optimism of people who kept searching for love, even when the odds, the hygiene, and the church's fourth cousin rule were stacked against them. History is proof that people will do just about anything for a chance at connection, even if it means relying on the dubious skills of the local matchmaker. It's easy to laugh at their struggles, their superstitions, and their legendary bad breath. But in the end, it was hope and persistence that pulled people through. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors, those tireless souls who survived lice, leeches, and weddings catered entirely by boiled cabbage, so you could swipe right in peace. May your dreams be free of dowry negotiations and suspicious pies, because if history teaches us anything, it's that people are ridiculous, resilient, and sometimes even lucky enough to find love, even if they had to bribe the matchmaker to get there. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with only the good kinds of medieval mischief. Good night.